I'm extraordinarily privileged to say, as the cleanup batter for this program, we have a man whose life's work it has been to promote religious freedom. I mentioned a moment ago that it's been institutionalized in the United States government. That is thanks to an act of Congress that our next speaker was the principal sponsor of and the driving force behind. He is former Congressman Frank Wolf. He served in the United States House of Representatives with great distinction from 1981 through 2015. I honestly don't know of a man, let alone a man who has served in that period of time, who enjoys a higher regard from his colleagues on both sides of the aisle. I honestly have never heard anyone say a word other than of the highest praise for him, and that is because in part of his integrity, that is in part because of his convictions. It is partly, of course, also due to his accomplishments, not the least of which is the International Religious Freedom Act, which now bears his name, by the way. Recognition of his high standing by those who are serving in Congress today. Congressman Frank Wolf has this issue on his heart. I think you'll hear that very much now, and I want to say to him both, thank you, sir, for inspiring the work we're about, and for, in particular, emphasizing the importance of holding not just the persecutors accountable for what they're doing, but for holding as well those who are enabling them to do it accountable in addition. Congressman Wolf, welcome, sir. Thank you for allowing protocol to be completely ignored and putting you at the cleanup batter role.
Thanks, Mike. Well, thank you all for coming. I'll cover two of the countries to let you know why this is such an important issue. The Saudi government was responsible for the death of Jamal Khashoggi. Just read the Washington Post and read the details of how that happened and when it happened. The Saudi government has published textbooks with anti-Semitic and anti-Christian literature. In my former congressional district, the Saudis run a school, the Saudi Academy, where the hatred in the textbooks. The Saudis funded most of the madrasas that were up on the Afghan-Pakistan border, many that led to what took place in 9/11, and a number of the people who were killed in 9/11 were from my congressional district. And so the Saudi government ought not have representation up on Capitol Hill, particularly when they're representing and funding radical Wahhabism around the world. With regard to China, every faith group in China is being persecuted. The Catholic Church is going through tremendous pressure. Catholic bishops, Bishop Su gave Holy Communion to Congressman Chris Smith, and he's never been seen since. There are roughly 300 Protestant pastors that have been taken away and put in jail. There are a large number of lawyers who are representing all the faith groups who have been taken away and put in jail. In the late 90s, I slipped into Tibet with a young Buddhist monk, and we went through the country with a trekking group to see what was taking place. Every monastery in Tibet has the public security police monitoring who comes in and what the people do there. 140 or more Tibetan monks and nuns have poured kerosene on their bodies and set themselves aflame in protest of what the Chinese government doing is basically cultural genocide with regard to the Tibetan people. And with regard to the Uyghur Muslims, if you read last week's Washington Post, Carl Gershom, head of the National Endowment for Democracy, said up to 3 million Uyghur Muslims are in detention or concentration camps. They're literally trying to eradicate them, and he said many more million who are not in the camps then have finders and placers who were in their homes monitoring everything they do. And lastly, we all know the Falun Gong. There are reports out of Freedom House and others that Falun Gong have been used for organ harvesting with regard to selling the organs. So what is taking place in China? What is taking place in Saudi Arabia and these other countries? Really, they do not deserve a representation up here on Capitol Hill.
Let me conclude by saying, first of all, thank you to all of you for joining in this cause. This effort, which is only beginning, and which is now manifesting itself, as I mentioned earlier, in 15 different cities across the country as we speak, in front of or nearby the offices of Squire Patton Boggs, is a movement. I personally was inspired to help launch this one by my experience as a young man working for a senator by the name of Henry Scoop Jackson, who pulled in behind a similar kind of grassroots movement in America trying to help Jews who were being persecuted in the Soviet Union. And as a result of that movement and Scoop Jackson's efforts and Ronald Reagan's, ultimately it translated into a strategy and a policy that contributed to the destruction of the Soviet Union and the liberation not just of millions of Jews, but hundreds of millions of other people. We believe that this is a moment when, by some estimates, 300 million Christians, and God only knows how many other millions of people of other faiths, are being persecuted horrifically around the world. We must do no less than was done in that earlier era. And let me just be clear, we're here talking about Squire Patton Boggs not because it's the only company in Washington that is supporting persecuting regimes. I'm sorry to say it isn't. It just happens to be one of the most prominent and one of the most influential. Partly because, as Congressman Wolf can attest, that's because they're very generous with their PAC donations to members of Congress. But what they're doing is wrong, ladies and gentlemen. What they and others who are representing persecutors are doing is enabling the persecution. It is, I'm afraid, making partners of this firm and others, associates of this firm and others, strategic advisors like John Boehner and Trent Lott and Tom Daschle and other employees of this firm and others, complicit in the persecution that is taking place. And I don't believe for a minute that most of the people in this building or in those other 15 offices or in the dozens of others around the world associated with this firm, Squire Patton Boggs, want to be complicit in persecution. And yet they are, unless and until they respond to the letters that we have sent now twice to Mark Ruhlman, the CEO of this firm. And I call on him and I call on Michael Curto, the managing partner of this particular office, to take the opportunity now, this week, before the ministerial meeting next week, to disassociate themselves and their firm from those who will be widely and properly vilified by country after country after country at our State Department next week. Because that ministerial to advance religious freedom is being thwarted by the work of people like those who are serving the interests of communist China, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, Cameroon, and the Palestinian Authority. So once again, let me say thank you to all of you here and through live streaming and elsewhere who are hearing about this important calling. And just to be clear, we haven't mentioned a whole bunch of other countries that are engaged in this practice and are being represented by others. North Korea comes to mind. India comes to mind. Countries in the Middle East, in the Far East, and more. Information about all of this is available at SaveThePersecutedChristians.org, among other places. And we urge you to become knowledgeable about this problem and to do what you can to help. Right now, today, I urge you to hashtag free2pray and SPB_global. Hashtag free to pray and hashtag SPB_global to get the attention of the world through the miracle of social media virtual rallies about what's happening here, who is responsible, who is enabling it, and what must now no longer be tolerated. Thank you very much for being with us. Thank you to all of you who've participated. Most especially, thank you to you, Congressman Frank Wolf. God bless you all.